Know when you're ready.
Hi there, I'm Danny Henderson. Welcome to my Rumble channel. This is the great Alex Collier, and he has some information to share with you that he's never shared publicly before. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, Danny. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to caution you, there's going to be some very graphic information here. This is information that I've had and I've sat with in my head and my heart for all these years. I touched upon it in an interview that I did in 1994. That interview sat in a drawer for 5 or 6 years until it was pulled out and it was entered into a film festival at one of the UFO congresses. And and that's the first time it ever came out. And of course it's still out there. And it's I don't know if anybody remembers it or if you haven't seen it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the information in that video and what I was shown. Now, what led up to that is that there were a lot of children disappearing from Westchester County in New York. And some of the kids that we went to school with, that I went to school with, their siblings or their older brothers or sisters were disappearing, had disappeared. This was also happening at other high schools that we played sports against. So it just organically kind of came together where we started putting up posters. We would go from New Rochelle, New York to Larchmont to Mamaroneck to Portchester, White Plains, all the way up into Old Greenwich, Connecticut, and then into Stamford. And then we went up and down the Hudson River to some of the smaller communities. And we were putting up posters of the missing kids in liquor stores, grocery stores, convenience stores, gas stations, anywhere that we could. And most people were completely open to it. They're like, sure, absolutely. And I've shared that when I started talking about this, it was interesting. No one knew me from a bar of soap. And yet there were people after some of the talks that identified themselves as state police, retired FBI, retired CIA, and they encouraged me to keep talking about this. And I tried to, but it's so dark. It's just so dark. And now the information is coming out. It's now with the Sound of Freedom and the work that Mel Gibson's doing, and many others who have done this work, Kathy O'Brien and many other people who have talked about this thing and the people involved, Epstein Island, all of that, Hollywood, Disney. Now that it's out in the open, I'm going to share this information, what the A's showed me about specific things that they showed me that were going on underground. Um, just bear with me. This is not easy. I did not know the term adrenochrome at the time. I didn't learn about that till many, many years later. And I understand that there are people within the exopolitics community who are like, there's no such thing as regressives and all of that. And I'm not here to judge anybody else's work. What I'm here to do is to share with you the information that I was given by Mornay and Faceas, both of them at the time. And when I asked to see what was going on, they showed me. Now they have their camera, the holographic camera, which I've shared many, many years with you all. And what they do is they can take a picture of anything living, and it shows the entire history. So they have the entire history of the Earth, all of it. And they showed me slices, as usual, like I've shared with you in the past, about this specific topic about the kids. And it wasn't always just kids. At times it was adults as well. And in the 94 video, I shared with you that we were food, that they were consuming humanity, and that they preferred children because they weren't spoiled or they weren't poisoned, and their bodies were very vibrant because they were young. They would take these kids underground and they would torture them. They would absolutely freak them out, scare them to death, and they would scare them over long periods of time to the point where they would not allow them to sleep. And if they had passed out, they would wake them up and they would continue to torture. They would bring them literally to moments of death where their hearts were just going to explode and stop. And it would be at that particular point that they would consume them. And they would start with their liver and their organs from here down. That's where they would start. And it would be like a feeding frenzy. You could see them. They would change their disposition and their composure. The reptilians now would change while they were consuming the kids, their organs. Now the children were alive as they were being consumed, and at some point they stopped. But they would consume this part of the body to the waist. And then the bodies would be dragged off to someplace else. Now, when we go to Dulce, and I'm going to bring Dulce into this, there were vats, big vats of what looked like blood that had body parts in it. And what the Tao, which we call the Greys, which Elena's people referred to as the Nabu, they would put their hand in these vats and they would take the fluid and they would put it on their arms and their bodies, and then their bodies would absorb the fluid. And this is blood. This was human blood of people who had been tortured and chopped up, etc. And from what I understand from talking about people who had scientists who were actually pulled out of there, and from military people that survived, the Gray's disposition would change as well. In other words, our fear, the fear that humans were put through, is actually a narcotic, a drug for these extraterrestrials. Now, there have been several movies, V being one of them, where they talk about consuming humans. Um, but in that particular series, they they would like it would almost be like rural roast, and they would roast us and then put us on a table and do that. And then you also have what is it, spirit something uh that
Cooking.
Hollywood people do. What's it?
Spirit cooking.
Spirit cooking, right. um and they would take this syrup and or whatever it is on these bodies, um and they would have these lavish parties, again doing this consumption of humanity has gone back thousands of years, but it was never done in front of humanity. It was always done in secret because we had to be unsuspecting in order for them to farm us. And that's basically what they were doing. Many of the reptilian races, especially those underground, were farming us. Now, the torture of young people and children, the way that it was done is if they had siblings, they would torture one and bring them to the point of death and then stop the torture. And then they would work on this other sibling and they would torture them to the point of near death, arousing the first victim. So they would go back and forth, and they would do this with, especially with siblings, because they knew there was an emotional connection. They knew there was a spiritual connection between the two siblings. And they would do this back and forth to get the children to a very specific point. And then they would consume both of them at the same time. And again, they would work on the organs from here down, okay, to the waist, to the reproductive organs. That's what they would do. And they would consume those while the children were still alive, after getting them back and forth to this point. Some of these torture sessions would last hours. Some were very, very short. I don't know how the reptilians knew how far they could push some of these kids, but somehow they knew. Obviously, they're very, very experienced with this. And this is not something that was new to Earth. This is something that the reptilian nations or civilizations, not all of them, but the ones that were here, that were particular to the Orion system, they had a long history of knowing how to do this. And this was brought to Earth. These techniques were brought to Earth. And how I think the elite of this world, this was shared with them by the extraterrestrials, because it was a way to know how to control the elite, how to addict them to this process, and to give them longer lifespans, and to make sure that they would comply with whatever the rules and regs were going to be, whatever it was that they were going to do with humanity, whatever processes they wanted to use us for. That was something that this was a way to bring in control. And at the same time, um, humanity because of the nature of our bloodlines and the fact that we have this compendium of all these different bloodlines, when they started exporting human trafficking us off world, they knew specifically which races, which groups would be very, very interested. And we were used as a currency. We were being used as a currency for technology and for other needs that these pirates, these groups had. This underground economy. I don't know what else to call it, but we were used as a currency. And I'm not just talking about Mars and Saturn or any of the moons of Saturn, or etc. You know, it's interesting. The dark side, the regressives, they always went around Jupiter and Ganymede. They always went around it. They never messed with that space. They always went around it. They always avoided it. Saturn was a different story. And I can't speak for Neptune and Uranus and beyond that. But they always gave Jupiter and Ganymede a wide berth for whatever the reasons. When I hear the stories about what they were finding in the tunnels, and ladies and gentlemen, my understanding is that they're still working the tunnels. And from what I also understand is that the inner Earth beings, those races in the inner Earth, they're also on board now, and they are approaching the tunnels from the inside out. Because this is not something we could do on our own. This was way in over our head, not only technologically, but because we don't know the tunneling systems. And we don't know where the traps are because we don't have the experience. We're not an underground species. We're not Hyperborean. But these other races have experience with this. Not only that, but we were the being involved in wars on the surface and seeing the carnage of war. You would think that it would help prepare us for what we would see in the tunnels, but it didn't. It didn't. Especially when you get into some of these very deep underground caverns and you come across a farm where human beings were being grown who have never seen sunlight. Some didn't even have eyes because they didn't need them. Some who didn't know how to speak. But nonetheless, they were being farmed for their fluids, strictly for their fluids and their organs. And there was this huge process of, on these farms, humanity was plugged in to devices. And this is how they were getting their bodily fluids in order for their bodies to grow. But at the same time, there were these other devices attached to them that would torture the physical body. I mean, the shit's so dark. It's just so dark. And for any one of us that's normal, you simply cannot wrap your head around how anyone could do this. And when you realize that there are those from the surface who were down there participating in this process for power, for control, for wealth, for the fluids themselves. And however long they were in there for these, to participate in these processes, to then go back to the surface and reintegrate with humanity, with their own families. You just don't know how they can do this. How do you just turn yourselves on and off to this? Unless you're either a complete split personality or multiple personality or psychopaths. And sadly, it's a combination of all of it. Because if you look at the world and the decisions that the elite have been making about choosing to eliminate, to genocide humanity, except for those chosen specific races or bloodlines. And now that they have the ability to clone people quite regularly, I mean, they can process a full-grown clone, I think, in less than 8 months now, that can live months. I think the newest clones can go 8-9 months, maybe almost a year, and they can do exactly the same processes to these beings. Now, when the Anunnaki created Homo sapiens sapien, and I don't know that Elena has talked about this. I watched her last Q&A, and maybe she just didn't want to go there. But the Anunnaki were very surprised that soul was attaching to the Homo sapiens sapiens. They were surprised that soul was attaching, because cloning has been around a very long time. And you can program clones to do just about anything. However, they don't all have soul. We have many people on the surface of the planet that are clones that don't have soul. And you can always tell because they only have an aura around their shoulders. Here, that's it. There is no full auric field around the body because there is no soul in it. And I know that there's controversy around this issue. They say anything living has soul. That simply is not what I've been told accurate. So, but they were surprised that soul was attaching to Homo sapiens sapien. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact of the many different genetics that make up who we are. This was extremely intriguing because of the extreme of emotions that we have. And it's that extreme of emotions that not only gives us our strength, it not only gives us our endurance, it not only gives us our compassion, but it also creates a field of emotion and chemicals within our bodies and our brains that they hadn't quite found anywhere else out there. Which is made us so unique. And because our physical bodies can hold souls from multiple dimensions, when we attach to the physical body, we leave an imprint, okay, a holographic imprint on the blood, on the DNA. This made us extremely valuable, especially when it comes to the blood, to the organs, to those dark things that the regressive groups were after. It also made us very unique in transhumanism and trying to make us multidimensional on a physical level. Man, I just don't know how to talk about this stuff. We are a race that is genetic royalty. And the limits to what we can accomplish knows no bounds. In other words, there may not be any limitations to what it is we can accomplish physically, spiritually, genetically, because we're so different. And if you were going to create a warrior class, if you were going to create a breed that could infiltrate multiple dimensions physically, we'd be it. We would be it. Especially when you have multidimensional souls coming into our physicality. If you could flip, if you could capture those souls in a matrix mind, a mind matrix, then essentially what you've done is you've not only captured the soul in a mind matrix, but you've captured a soul group, because we're all connected. We're all connected. That means you would capture it. And just like you have remote viewers here, you could use these same beings that are captured in this mind matrix to remote view their soul groups and know what they're doing. You see, this is why intervention had to occur. Because what it did was, you know, there's the universe always goes through resets where things are upgraded, okay? And things that no longer work go away. Okay? This is how the universe learns. This is how source learns, is by a process of experiencing. It's obviously using us and we it to on this journey of self-discovery. Well, when the resets come, things go away. Well, the regressives clearly were in fear, and what they wanted to do was make sure that they would survive by capturing this group that was connected to all things. Now, you know, we have, and I've talked about this, and so have others over the years, you know, we have souls here from 3rd to 11th density. Some say 12. I don't know about that, but I can confirm 11. that are here having this experience, this physical experience. If you could capture them, well, then you could literally hold everyone for ransom. You would have leverage over all these soul groups going through the dimensions. That's how twisted this thing has gotten and has become. And that's why the intervention is fourth, fifth, sixth, and now I understand seventh and eighth dimensions. Could even be higher. Source itself may also be involved, which would only make sense. And then we have 12th dimension, these beings who no one has seen before. You have the angelic realm, which directly is associated with Source itself, herself, now infiltrating, coming down through the dimensional realms. I mean, when you understand what was going on, it makes sense. All these other loose pieces coming together, because there's some information in the exopolitics realm that we're getting from different sources and contactees that doesn't make any sense, because we don't know where the pieces all fit together and how they fit together. They're just out there, and you're like, wow, that's weird. That doesn't make any sense, or that's outrageous, or how could that possibly be true? And yet at this point, you cannot discount anything, because we don't fully understand the big picture. We never have. We were the last ones that anybody wanted to know what the true story was. Because once we get the big picture consciously, we can change everything ourselves, because we're fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th density beings. We represent all of this. The minute we figure it out down here, we can shift everything and say, that's it, we're done. So that's why we were absolutely given the full court press in this matrix, this prison that we didn't know we were in. That's why we were given these religions. That's why we were giving all these limitations. That's why they messed with the DNA to give us a shorter lifespan, so we would have to go over and over and over again and never actually have time to figure it out, because we would die off before we could figure it out. And then you poison the food chain. Then you poison the air, the water supply. All of this was a program to trap us. And now we have a reset coming. Sometime between now and 2030, we have a reset that's coming, which is freaking everybody out. And there's no way they can stop it. They're trying. They've been doing everything frantically, but the universe is doing a reset. And this is why it's so important that we catch up. This is why it's so important that we understand disclosure, that we've never been alone, that humanity, the heart of humanity, belongs to a much larger family that isn't just human, but it's life itself. All life itself. We're part of this creation of all that is. And on a soul level, we've all come from Source. We didn't come from extraterrestrial races. We were Source first. And then the space was created by Source. The physicality was created by Source and groups that work directly for Source. And then the souls came in to manifest and to create. I once asked Visayas about, and this was in the 90s, 80s or 90s, about dark energy. And his response was, well, that's just areas of the universe that haven't been magnetized by thought. So it's all thought. It's all consciousness. That's all it ever is. It's just all a holograph. But what makes it real is our belief in it and the energy that we put into it. That's what makes it so solid. And that's why we've had the full court press here on the planet to convince us of our limitations, which aren't real at all. None of them are real, but they had to convince us that we were limited, and then they had to disempower us, because if we rebelled, we'd change everything, which is what we're in the process of doing now, is rebelling against this dark authority, this regressive authority, this structure, this matrix structure that they had us in. And we're not the only ones. Other star nations have been freed from this same matrix. But somehow we ended up being the caboose here. The last car, the last planet. What we do individually, and then what we do together as a collective group of soul groups here, changes everything. And it's just what it is. This is the role we have. This is the role we're in. And whether anyone's in denial about it or not simply doesn't matter. You're going to evolve, or you're going to start over somewhere else. Because the reset's coming, and what that looks like is anybody's guess. But the thing about change is that you either embrace it, and in embracing it, you trust and you become vulnerable to go where the currency takes you, the current of frequency takes you, or you oppose it and the change happens without you. Now, we have been conditioned to be afraid of change. Again, that's a program that was done to trap us, to keep us stuck. Danny, I don't know where you want to go with this now. I have no idea.
I didn't want to interrupt, of course, and just let you go because, as you say, you've been holding all of this in for so many years, and you're so beloved, and there are so many that come to you for your knowledge, and so I am just in awe that you can speak to the things you speak to, that you explain it so beautifully. It's easy to understand from your perspective, the way that you've laid it out, but understandably, you've been holding it for so long. I think that
in war, that wherever there's been war, there have been sightings. And you also know that soldiers and casualties, some dead, some barely alive, those bodies were taken, okay, by not us. In Vietnam, there were things living in those jungles that were not us. They were not us. And the locals would tell our military, don't go in there. But of course, if we were given orders, we had to go into some of these areas. And things happened. Things happened that to our military, MIA, there's a lot more to that. And the military has not been forthcoming with those things that have happened in war in the Pacific. There were other things as well that were going on there by things living in those jungles that were not us. They were not the Japanese. Parts of Europe, there were things in the Black Forest and other areas that were not us, that would come up from underground. They would take the bodies and they would be gone. So, we so need to be told the truth. And I believe that, well, the Q post says that not everyone could be told the truth because 99% of the world's population would have to be hospitalized.
Mm.
I think that's probably true. At least at that point, it was true. Um, I would hope that at least 10% of us could handle the truth.
Mm.
Um,
I think it's higher now. I do. I
I
remember,
would hope so.
yeah, I remember years ago when I heard pretty much a lot of what you're saying. I literally was in bed for 3 days. I couldn't move. I couldn't function. I've been through my own trauma, as many humans have, and also as a therapist and work with trauma people, trauma patients. But even with all that training, I couldn't cope with. And then I realized, well, I have to get up. We have a job to do. We have a mission. And I feel like even since then, for me, that most thinking humans who are starting to question have been exposed to some kind of documentary or a rumor, or TikTok has gone mad with, conspiracy. I mean, whatever it's called. But this drip, drip, drop, drop, drip, drip, drop, drop coming in all the time into our consciousness. So I think that the humans have been really primed for the horrors that you're speaking to on a much, much broader level. And the fact is they need to and have needed to. We do need to make the point. The reptilians, the Sicard draconians, you need to give us the names, please, and advise humanity that these regressives are no longer here doing that in the way that they were. We don't want to put people into more fear by you sharing this. This is what was happening. So I'll just turn over to you for you to share what
Okay.
feels right.
Well, that's why I said intervention had to happen. Yeah, uh, well, the CCAR, other reptilian underling groups that they had working for them. You had the Tao. You also had some human groups or half human groups, half human, half reptilian. Uh, there was an element of the Anunnaki that was very, very dark. They did the dirty work, you know, not necessarily for Enki, but uh, for others.
You said the dirty work
They're they're
for Enki
they're
there. Did you mean to say that?
they didn't work for Enki. No,
Right.
that was not his gig. He created life. That was not his gig. That was not his gig. He didn't start wars. That was his brother's. That was his brother's gig. You know, it's you have the warrior and then you have the doctor. You know, that's the best way to describe who they were as persons. You know, um, but that's kind of Elena's lane. She has a lot more information about that than I do. And Dr. Sala's work right now is bringing a lot of that up. And, to those of us who have been in this field for a long, long time or have been studying it, we're watching the disclosure and it's drip, drip, drip to us. But to people just waking up, it's like, wow, look at all this information. It's coming hard and fast.
Yeah.
Well, it hasn't. It's not really, but it's something. It's something. And I know that there's a plan and how to do this, and they've worked this out, and they've gained this, and there have been multiple races off world and on the surface who are all on board with how to do this. To try to wake humanity up without traumatizing everybody. But there are going to be some startling revelations nonetheless. Now, this is not occurring anymore. What's happening with the human trafficking, sadly, is our own people now. It is humanity doing this to humanity. And these people that are doing this, who, whether they're doing the adrenochrome or not, if they're grabbing kids and taking them underground for the money, for the organ harvesting, they need to be removed from the equation. They cannot live with us any longer. They have to be removed. And end of story. Because they'll never stop. They will not stop, these people. Okay. They're not humans anymore. They walk and talk, but they're not humans anymore. They don't feel human. They don't think like a human. Everything's a product to them. They have to be removed from the equation. So what's happening is now that we're seeing the shift in energy. And the shift in the energy is not just that this is stopping and slowing and being exposed. But what's also happening is that we have a lot more children coming in who are gifts to humanity. They are the ones carrying the frequency of 5 and 6D. And they're volunteers. They're volunteering to come in now. And then you have the middle-aged group of humanity who is of the world, but their consciousness is beginning to shift. And even though they've grown up in the computer technology era, and that's where a lot of their focus has been on the tech, that's all going to change when they get into the quantum physics. And these kids, they're going to be they're whether they realize it or not, that they're going to be the ones who are technologically going to change humanity in a very positive way as soon as they understand and get exposed to quantum physics, because that will turn their heads inside out, and they will see technology in a completely different way that will benefit all of humanity. They will put the pieces together. So we will have the quantum physics technological pieces. You will have the spiritual piece that's being brought in by the kids now. And then you have us vintage folks who now understand. We may not understand the quantum, we may not get all the spiritual pieces, but what we do understand is building a foundation of freedom, because we've lived it, we've had the experience. And that's why when I say to folks, we are now forefathers and foremothers, the foundation that we lay now of what is government, what is sovereignty, what is freedom, what does that look like? We can lay a foundation so that these younger generations have a step up. It's like a ladder. We're building a ladder or a stairway for these kids to take humanity up to the next levels in the next, whatever it looks like beyond 2030. We don't know yet. But the work we do now is building that stairway for them to take future generations to the next level. And that's our work for those of us who are vintage. We have an obligation to do this, to get as much information to them, to make sure that there's real clarity about what's happened and what our potential is in the future. And we're learning that ourselves. We're learning, we're learning all of this as well as they are. It's just, we're the elders, so we have to do whatever we can do to clear the path for them, to get rid of the rubble, to get rid of the bullshit, to get rid of the deep state. Like President Trump says, I will demolish the deep state. Well, he's not alone. All of us have to be there and do it. Behind him, side by side with him. That's what we have to do. We have to be like bulldozers and just get rid of these SOBs, clear the path for future generations. Oh, so that they have the opportunity, because they have the right to take humanity to wherever it can go, you know. And some of us will be here and some of us will not be here to see that. But nonetheless, that's the job. That's the mission. That's always been the mission, even though many of us are just waking up to it now. But that's why we came back in time to right a terrible wrong. You know, and I don't recall some of this stuff being in the brochure.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't in the brochure.
It's an understatement.
But
Mm. Well, you mentioned Trump, and again, the thing that happens in humanity is we have just witnessed you sharing and unloading one of the worst possible things that most people could never imagine. You've just delivered that. And then because of the programming that happens since birth to death, or has been happening from birth to death, you mentioned Trump, people's programs immediately switch on. And then they go, oh, politics. And then that's a mind distraction. People's role in the recovery of self, in the rise of humanity, is to recognize one word, an image, a smell, a person. You have to be able to pull back in and focus back, for example, on what Alex is saying, because whatever feeling you have attached to that name, it's going to try and distract you. Those that are all for Trump and think he's a savior are going to go, yay.
oh,
Those that have an issue, they then switch off and they go in a different direction. Of course, this isn't about politics, and you're not saying that for 1 second. This is
it
only
is not
about
about politics.
it's only
It is not
about
about politics
humanity.
at all. Donald Trump is a trigger. Okay, he was a trigger. That's why the military chose him, because he would be a trigger. And what he's done by being the trigger has nothing to do with leadership. It has to do with, now the conversation is about everything. Okay, we can now see the light and we can see the dark. We can see that all the structures on the planet have been corrupted and were put in place and built to enslave humanity. Okay, so he is just the trigger for everybody to have this conversation now, and to see how broken everything has been and always was. That's it. You know, um, whatever his role is in the future, he's still just a trigger. Ultimately, it's we, the people, and I'm talking about all of humanity on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
We, the people, if we're going to live on this planet, if we're going to live in peace, we're the ones that have to create that. We're the ones that have to figure out what the hell we want. What does it look like when we know what we want? This journey to self-discovery, one of the hardest things is to know not only who we are, but what defines who we are is figuring out what it is that we want. We've had all these systems and these programs telling us what we're supposed to want, but they have been leading us down this path to a jail. They've led us into this jail of materialism, and we're not material beings. We are spiritual beings in a physical body. And that's the trap. So now we have to back ourselves out of all this materialism and remember, hey, I'm a spiritual being. I'm connected to source. I come from a bloodline that's millions and millions of years old. I have a soul group of ascended beings that I tap into, that I can connect with. I have loved ones on the other side who are in fourth or fifth density wanting to communicate with me, but I don't know that I can do that because religion says I can't. This says I can. This says I can't. Da, 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 da. So what happens is we limit ourselves based on our belief systems. And what we have to do is back ourselves out of all these belief systems. Passage used to say, it doesn't matter what you believe in as long as you know why. Well, we don't even ask that question anymore because our fathers did it, our grandfathers did it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we go along with the program. Well, it's time to change the program. We have to change the program. And so that's the whole thing. We have to reverse engineer everything that we've been stuck in, and we have to figure out what it is that we want. And literally, we're going to have to start from scratch to rebuild our world and our civilization. And there's no question we can do it. I mean, we're here. We're going through the process. There's a reason that we're here and we're going through this process of awakening. It's just because it's time. Because obviously, Source is convinced that we can do this. And I don't know if we were handpicked. I think we're mostly all volunteers, but I think the volunteers who chose this chose it because we believed we could do it. And that's why we're here. System busters. And that's the work now. That's the work. But, the old system has to collapse. We can't build anything on top of this corrupt system because it'll only become corrupt because we're not recognizing all the corruption yet. That's why it all has to be exposed so that we can truly see it for what it is and what it was. And then we can say, no way, Jose, do we want this any longer? And, and it's we the people. It's we humanity that are going to have to do this. Not one person is going to do it. His job, Trump's job as a trigger is to expose it all and get everybody's attention. And he has masterfully done that. He's exposed all of it. The system, the politics, the money, the financial system, all of it is now exposed. Everybody's taking a second look at it or questioning it. Even those who can't stand him, look what COVID's done. Everybody is now questioning the medical system. Here you have a system that is poisoning us. And when we need help, we go to the same system that's profiting off our sickness. How is that ever going to help us? It's not. It's not. It was designed to keep us in the loop, to keep us stuck, to keep us here. When the same system makes you sick and then profits from you, off of you to fix you, that's an issue. That's a huge issue. So, not everybody's going to make it. But, you have to remember that death is just part of the journey. It's only one step of the journey. We've all been dead before. We all come back. You have a soul that lives forever and then eternity. So, there is no fear in it once you truly understand who you are and what you are. What this looks like going forward is anybody's guess. We're all trying to figure this out, and this is one big Rubik's cube, and we are furiously trying to put all the pieces together to figure out what this thing is and how it's supposed to come together. And the secret to knowing what you want is first realizing what you don't want. And the more disclosure there is, the more we're beginning to realize what we don't want. Because it's obvious the system we're in now was designed to enslave us. It's plainly obvious to everyone. And we have an obligation to make sure that future generations, our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, they have the opportunity to be free, to live free, to understand what true sovereignty and freedom is. We have an obligation to make that happen for them. Now, will it end with us? I don't know. But we have to do what we can do. We have to break down the walls, tear up the foundations, and educate future generations to what we know and to the process of building whatever future that is meant to be. And that's what the alliances are here for. The Star Nation Alliance is to mentor, to help with that, because we don't know what true sovereignty is or freedom. We know it as an idea, as a concept, but we don't know how to put those pieces together. They do. But we have to step up. We're the ones that have to do the hard lifting. We're the ones that have to do all the heavy lifting, because this is our civilization. This is our civilization that we're building and creating, that we want to survive.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. This is a really, really big deal. And, the first thing we're going to have to do is trash all the history we've been taught, because it's rubbish.
Yeah.
It's all rubbish. And a lot of people are going to have a hard time with that. But, when you roll with the punches, you always end up on your feet. And, when you decide to take flying lessons, you either land on your feet or you learn how to fly. And it's time to learn how to fly, folks. It is time to learn how to fly. Just make the decision to learn how to fly.
When you mention our
Okay.
children of today, the children of today, my desire for them is for all of the parents and whatever to treat them as they are supposed to be treated, like the beautiful, innocent, pure royalty they are. Of course, like a young puppy or a young horse, you need a little bit of guidance, but they should never be beaten, be verbally abused, be any of the things that we've all been programmed generation after generation after generation. Taking it all the way back to ancient history, what we've been told in terms of different messengers or leaders that have come to try and educate humanity. If you look at the man known as Jesus, one of the things that he tried to do was show everyone around him, what I do, you can do. I think he came in as a fully realized human, fully conscious of all of our abilities, and he came to show us. But of course, it was taken. He was murdered. He's hung on a cross in a murderous, awful vision to traumatize and terrorize. So deep in the DNA, this is what happens. If you come forward and you say, we are beautiful, we are royalty, we are amazing, they try to do the opposite, as we know. We are all beautiful, and we are starting to realize who we are and the royalty that we are, that you so eloquently said.
He did, assuming everything is accurate, he did say, these things I do, ye shall do greater if ye have faith. And I would like to remind you that when Jesus was walking on water, so did Peter. Peter also walked on water with him. So, everybody kind of forgets that piece of the puzzle there. He did do it. Hands-on healing. Many people have had that gift throughout life. Of hands-on healing and being able to, what we would call, miracles. These are innate abilities all of us have, but the church, again, another one of those matrix programs, was very, very threatened by women by the feminine principle. And the Inquisition was designed to take out the midwives, because they were the center of the community, the cultures. They delivered the babies, they did the healing, they did the natural healing. They were the sages of their time, and they had to be removed in order for the church to dominate the thinking of the people. And the feminine principle was directly in its way of achieving that. And now that the feminine principle is coming back, we're going to see some spectacular collapses of of male dominance programming because it's never been balanced. And no matter what we do going forward, the male and the feminine have to be balanced. And the masculine energy has to be a responsible partner going forward. It cannot dominate anything because we're just not built for it. It will destroy everything all over again. And this is not going to be easy. There's a lot of rebuilding of trust that has to occur within the ranks of humanity. A lot of forgiveness, a lot more communication has to occur between the male principle and the feminine principle. And we somehow have to figure it out. And I think that's a huge piece of the mentorship, is to reteach us how to communicate with each other without being afraid, without the fear or the anger. Because there's been so much miscommunication, so much misunderstanding that has fueled, the separation of not only the races, but the genders as well. I mean, the dark side did their job very, very well. They really, really did. And we have to recognize what they did so that going forward, it doesn't happen again. They fucked us up pretty good. They really did.
Yeah.
There's just no other way to say it.
Yeah.
A lot of us are broken, and it's going to be a process to fix, to unravel the brokenness.
Yeah. What gives me great delight is knowing that, yes, the people that restructured this planet and took rights and life and soul frequency from us, humanity as a mass, ultimately, they have failed. Ultimately, they showed their hand. They are scrabbling on the last bits, but they failed. So they did not win. Ultimately, they failed. And that is what humanity now has the opportunity to see, because it's too late for the dark ones.
They've had every opportunity to right a wrong. They had every opportunity to flip back towards the light, and instead they went deeper into the darkness. So whatever their path is going forward, I'm sure they've deserved every bit of it, but that's not for me to judge. So or anybody. That's on source to correct. But all we can do is pick up the pieces and start moving forward again. And that's the job. That's the work right now. That's the mission.
It's the mission.
So that's the mission.
Well, on that note, sir, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your heart and your knowledge. I know that was not easy for you.
No.
We really appreciate you, Alex Collier.
Thanks, Danny. I appreciate you too. And I know you're having a tough time of it, but when you're kicking indoors, that's how it goes. And ladies and gentlemen, you don't want to miss GSIC. You want to be in Orlando, and you want to go to number 3 whenever that's officially announced. You want to support this work because it's about rebuilding humanity. It's about rebuilding community, and it's about reconnecting with our soul groups. It's about us, it's about us, the human race, the Terran race. There's a lot of resources in our solar system. Whether you believe it or not, there are a lot of resources here. And if they didn't think we were worth it, no way would all those resources be here. So, and they are here. We just have to step up. And the first thing we have to do is honestly and genuinely look at ourselves. The life we have, the issues we have on the planet, we know they're not sustainable the way they are. So we have to make changes. And it's we, the people, that have to do it. We have to make the changes. We're the ones who call the shots, not the governments.
Mm-hmm.
The United States was built for self-rule, where the people rule. We dropped the ball. We had a lot of things to learn. Now that we've learned them and we realize our mistakes, we can turn this thing around, but we have to do the work. And we have to hold all those accountable because it sets the precedent for future generations. If you're going to be in politics and you're going to represent the people, you damn well better represent the people, not become corrupt and decide to screw everybody over. No, going forward, that's not going to happen anymore. So
it won't be tolerated. There'll be no
will not
ability to get into that frequency. It's a really good time for the top darkness. There's always a second in command or a third in command to the ultimate. And this is the time where the second in command, the third in command, this is where they need to recognize that there's nowhere for them to go. Now is the time to come forward and start speaking out and start sharing. So,
to those men and women in uniform who are working with the Alliance, that are working for the betterment of humanity, that are with Space Force, that are with Solar Warden, you have my deepest and most profound gratitude for what you're doing, because you're doing all this and you can't share it with your loved ones. You're spending a lot of time away from those you love and your family in order to do this. You're on the front lines. And I just want you to know that you will forever be enshrined in the memory of humanity as we go forward. And I know that sometimes that's not a consolation when you're stuck in a foxhole taking fire, but it's the mission, isn't it? It's about the mission. And I just want you to know that we love and we appreciate you and everything that you do for everyone. So, and Danny, I don't want to talk past the close here. So
no, this is beautiful. This is your broadcast, Alex. This is for you. I'm just here to hold space and honor you as my beloved friend and colleague. And there's a little
for those who might be, where's Merlin? We never see Merlin on the webinars. Well, here he is. Here's Sir Merlin.
Oh, buddy. Hello, darling.
Yeah. Say hi to Hannah. Hannah's a girlfriend you haven't met yet.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. All right, Alex, thank you so much. Love you.
Love you too.
Wow.
Hang in there, hang in there. I know it's tough. You take arrows and all you got to do is keep pulling them out. And if you can, fire them back.
Yeah. We just move forward. We move forward because we love our brothers and our sisters. We love humanity, and however tough it might be, sometimes we have to pull that band-aid off, that plaster as we call it, and just listen and go, okay, this is the reality. Now we're going to heal. Now we're going to move forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, Danny is under fire for GSIC and doing the work that she's doing, and she needs our support. So please offer your support. Check in with her, ask her what you guys can do to help her. Because she's one of us. She's on the front lines, and it sucks being on the front lines. There is nothing glamorous about it whatsoever.
Not at all. I don't know why anybody would ever volunteer. I'm like, I am kicking myself in the ass. I am withdrawing my contract. When this is all done, I'd be like, are you kidding me? I need 1,000 years off.
Yeah. I want to go to Antares and lay on the beach.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Alex, I don't know a bigger warrior, a bigger, longer term warrior than you. And you've laid the path for so many of us that step forward because we love and we know that this is a beautiful life that we came to have, and we will enjoy it. We will heal together. And thank you.
Well, there were others before us. Wendell Stevens, Clifford Stone, Robert Dean, George Green, Bill Cooper, and many, many others. Jordan Maxwell. There have been many who have also blazed the trails that we follow, and they shouldn't be forgotten.
So many.
They should be acknowledged.
Pete Peterson. I mean, there are so many beautiful
Pete Peterson,
names.
exactly. So, many, many others. All right. Thanks,
All
Danny.
right. All
Great.
right. Thanks, Alex.
Take
And to
care.
you
God
guys,
bless.
thank you. God bless.
Take care.
Take care.